Good evening, and thank you for joining the Voice of Many podcast show with your host Yolanda and co-host Vanessa. We have with us Miss Charlene Madden. She has experienced and met life in some of its darkest moments. But I repeat, the darkest moments that had her, it didn't take a hold of her to where it won. Today, she has claimed victory over sexual trauma, domestic violence, mental illness, and she's grasped the reins of even suicide. Here to share her journey, we want to welcome Miss Charlene. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute honor to be here.
If you will share with us and those listening and those watching a little bit about your life story, and take your time.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll tell you where I'm at now because I like to focus on where I'm at now. I live in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I am right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I am married to an absolutely amazing man, coming up 4 years, and I am the mom of 3 absolutely amazing children that I am so blessed to have, probably because they kept me alive for a lot of years. So I'm very grateful for them for that. And when I say that, it's because I really struggled in my life. My life story is unfortunately, a lot of people can relate to it. And, I really wish I could say that I was the only one that had this story. That would make me so happy. But I know so many people struggle with the same things that I have. And it really started when I was 3.5. I was born into a pretty dysfunctional home. My dad was a severe alcoholic. And my parents at that point, I had 2 older brothers who were half brothers and an older sister. And when my dad drank, he was really violent towards my half brothers, of course, because they weren't his. So they were easy targets. And my mom had to make a decision. She got to the point where she knew if she stayed, my dad was probably going to kill one of my brothers in a drunken rage. And she wanted to pack us all up and go. But my dad made it very clear she could not leave with my sister and I. So my mom was stuck with a decision. Does she leave and take and save the 2 children that she can, leaving behind her daughters, or does she stay and risk, the death of a child? So the decision she made was to take my brothers and go. And about 2.5 weeks in, my dad, again, being such a bad alcoholic, he was in no shape to raise 2 little kids. So he contacted my grandparents and asked if they would take us in. And my grandmother, who was an absolutely amazing woman, she didn't bat an eye. She said, of course, we'll take the girls in. And she was incredible. She taught me to be very strong, resilient, independent. I probably learned some of those lessons a little too well, but and as wonderful as my grandmother was, my grandfather, unfortunately, was a pedophile. So after moving in at the age of 3.5, we started experiencing sexualized trauma at the hands of my grandfather. And this went on for 9 years. And, I think back, people have asked, why didn't you say anything? And, I think as a child coming from a home where I didn't feel wanted from either of my parents, that I was in a home with my grandmother, who was really the only stability that I had. And I was so terrified that if I said anything, I would be ripped away from the only family that I knew. So of course, that fear creates silence. And I don't know how long it would have lasted. My sister at the age of 16 basically went to school and had a nervous breakdown. She was terrified that she was going to become impregnated by my grandfather. And she desperately wanted to leave, but she knew that if she left, the full brunt of his abuse would then be turned on me. And she was doing everything she could as a big sister to protect me. So she's 16, I am 12 and a half. Everything came out. My grandfather was arrested. My grandparents got divorced. The family that I knew kind of broke apart. And this created a lot of chaos in a life that was already felt like it was full of chaos. And I remember sitting, and we're talking the early 80s when all of this happened. So counseling and therapy, not a really big thing back then. So
Yes.
there really wasn't any follow-up care. I remember sitting in a social worker's office, the Child Protective Services, and having a social worker come around and pat me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I just want you to know everything is going to be okay, Charlene." And I remember thinking at 12 and a half, I don't know what that is.
Mm.
I don't have never felt okay. So what is okay supposed to feel like?
Mm.
And so now I go into high school, and I mean, that's a transitional time for anybody, but I'm going into high school with the stigma of being a child abuse victim, sexual abuse victim. And I lived in a small rural area. So everybody, or felt at least as if everybody knew. It wasn't something you could escape from. And so very quickly on in high school, I started suffering from mental health problems. I was getting extremely depressed. I was starting to get suicidal. I started cutting as a way of a coping mechanism to try to have an outlet for these emotions that were so overwhelming. And, I always said I was, pouring blood, or I began to write. So I was able to pour ink onto paper rather than blood. So writing became a little healthier outlet. I also started drinking, smoking marijuana, anything I could to numb or alleviate those emotions that I was feeling. And of course, writing was, my outlet, but it was also very dark and depressing stuff that I was writing. So it caught the attention of my English teacher, who sent me off to the guidance counselor, who brought in a school psychologist. And here I was sitting talking to a school psychologist for 4 hours one afternoon, answering questionnaires, talking to her, which was really the last thing I wanted to do. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted to forget that it ever happened. And I remember after that 4 hours, her looking across the desk at me and saying, "Charlene, we're diagnosing you as bipolar manic depressive." And again, I'm sitting there going, at 15 and a half at this point, I'm going, I have no idea what that means. I mean, we're talking, there's no Google back then. I sure wasn't going to pull a library book off the shelf to find out what that meant. To me, all it meant was, now I'm crazy on top of everything. And so all I could think of, as I'm walking out and her saying, "But I want you to know you're going to be okay." And again, I'm starting to get angry, because I'm like, why are all these adults telling me I'm going to be okay? Because I sure don't feel okay. And, she was like, "If you need to talk, come back, book an appointment." Again, that was the last thing I wanted to do. So I did what I knew well. I put my head down and just tried to get my way through high school. I think with my grandmother being so old school, that was the way she coped with things. It was like, let's just put our head down. We can pull our way through anything. And that was how I coped. I moved away as soon as I graduated high school. I moved away with my high school sweetheart and thought that everything was going to be different, because I'd moved away from where everything happened. I was going to make a fresh start, live a new life. But the problem was, it wasn't where I was, it was who I was. That was the issue. I was bringing the trauma with me no matter where I went, because I hadn't dealt with it. And I didn't have any healthy coping mechanisms. So very early on, my boyfriend and I decided we're going to get married. We're going to have kids. And we had three, as I said, three absolutely amazing kids. And I think each time I had a child, that it was going to fill a little bit of that hole that I had inside. I was going to have someone that was finally going to truly love me, and that was going to stay. They weren't going to leave me like everybody else was, because I was so terrified of abandonment. Everybody I thought was going to leave me. And what I didn't realize was I was putting a lot of pressure on my children to fulfill something that they had no ability to fulfill. And so again, my coping mechanism through all of this is, I'm working lots because I'm trying to distract myself. I'm drinking lots because I'm trying to numb everything. And I'm trying to maintain a marriage and a life as a parent. And that's not very a great way to cope with any of that stuff. So when I was 28, I basically had a nervous breakdown. I remember I was contemplating suicide. I was thinking about how I could do it, and realizing it was going to be my kids that were going to find me. They were going to come home from school and they would be the ones that would find my body. And that terrified me, because I so desperately wanted to break the generational cycle of trauma. I just didn't know how. So I had to sit down with my husband and said, I think I need to leave the house right now. I'm not fit to look after myself, let alone 3 little kids. And I need some time to get myself together. And at this point, our marriage had basically fallen apart anyway. So he was quite fine with me moving. So I moved out. I actually moved in with my mother-in-law. And what was meant to be a healing process just sent me down on a spiral, because now I had the guilt that I had just repeated the cycle of what my parents had done to me. I had left my children. I had let alcohol control my life, so I felt like here I was, my mother and my father, all the negative thoughts I had about them, I had just completely encapsulated that. And that guilt and shame was basically too much to bear. And I started sinking again into depression. And of course, right at that time, when I'm starting to hit rock bottom, I jumped into another relationship because I was so desperate to find someone that would love me.
Yeah.
And when they say like attracts like, they are very true, because the person I got into the relationship with was extremely toxic. He was an alcoholic. I wasn't aware at the time. He was a drug addict. And he was really violent when he drank. And I think it kind of reinforced the narrative I had around myself, that the shame and the guilt of leaving my kids, that I deserved the abuse that I was getting. I kind of felt like I didn't deserve to be treated well. No one had treated me well other than my grandmother in my life. So I just felt like I didn't deserve to be treated any different. And so it just kept me in that dysfunctional pattern of abuse. And, it's always I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. And then of course it always happens again. So about 2 years into the relationship, after an extremely bad evening, he had left the apartment, and I kind of went, I can't do this anymore. And it's funny because the thought of leaving the relationship never crossed my mind, but my go-to was leaving life. That seemed to be my outlet. It was easier for me to leave my life than leave the relationship. And so I went to my bathroom cabinet and I grabbed all the pills that were in there and I took them all. And then I sat down on my couch with a pad of paper and pen and started writing my goodbye letters to my kids. And I pray that no one has ever had to experience that. But that action saved my life, because as I was sitting there trying to write down on paper why I was leaving my kids in the most final way, I realized I couldn't do it. And so I called a cab. I made it to the hospital, and I was sitting at the admissions desk telling them that, hey, I think I'm overdosing on all these pills, and I collapsed. And when I woke up, I had tubes down my throat. I'm laying in a hospital bed with my partner, who just hours before had almost choked me to death, sitting in a seat, crying, saying how sorry he was. And, of course, that it would never happen again. And I just so desperately wanted to believe it. And all I could think of was, I need to get out of the hospital. I don't want to be here. So after, some assessments and making sure that I was fit to leave and not a danger to myself, they released me the next morning. And I got home and got a phone call from my mom, who I had maintained contact with throughout my life. And she said, Charlene, I think you need to make a change. You need to change your life. Let's pack the kids up, come move across the country. We'll help you make a fresh start, create a new life. And for me, this fit my pattern. Again, I thought, oh yeah, perfect. I'll just move and everything will be better. Not realizing that once again, I was just taking the problem with me. So I moved across the country, and 6 months later, my partner, who I had left, he contacts me and says, I'm moving out there as well. I realize I love you. I miss you. I want to be with you. And I thought, fantastic. This is it. Everything's going to be great. And it wasn't. It was more dysfunction. And this went on for another decade, a decade of drinking, drug addiction on his part, violence, trying to hide it from everybody in my life, and trying to keep myself from not going off that deep end that I was so close to all the time. And I remember it was July 1st, which is Canada Day here. He came home, this is 2015, and said, I'm moving out. And I was kind of like, what do you mean you're moving out? And he's like, yeah, I'm moving out today. I'm moving in with someone else. And I felt absolutely devastated and betrayed. And I thought, I have been your verbal and physical punching bag for a decade, over a decade. And now you're just leaving me. I was so, of course, angry, but I should have been relieved, but I was just so angry and so hurt. But I thought, okay, Charlene, now's our chance. We can finally get ourselves together, because I kept thinking that, that was going to happen. And I was on the right path. I was, had a great support group, and I was starting to get my life together. And about 2.5 months after he moved out, he messaged me and said, hey, can we get together and talk? And I said, no, you've moved on with your life. I know if I see you, I'm going right back to square one. You've started over. I need to start over. And I was so proud of myself. I thought, wow, you're finally strong enough to have those boundaries. And he says, I just want you to know I'm sorry for how things ended. And, I had become philosophical in my leaving. And I said, you know what? Everything happened the way it was supposed to. It's ended the way it was supposed to. And that was it. And then 2 days later, I had a police officer walk into my place of work and takes me outside, because he knew where to find me, because he had been involved in one of our domestic disputes. And he informed me that my ex-partner had committed suicide.
Wow.
And I was devastated again. I felt guilt over, maybe if I would have met with him, he would still be here. Anger at myself, anger at him, and just distraught, because now I was going to have to go home and tell my kids, who, for all intents and purposes, for the last 13.5 years, he had raised them and been their dad, because their own dad wasn't involved in their life. And I was going to have to go tell them that. And it was not a great moment. And unfortunately, because I was so trapped in my own grief, I wasn't there to help them with what they were going through. And that's probably my biggest regret, is that I was so trapped in myself that I wasn't able to be there for them. So 2 weeks after he's committed suicide, I'm sitting with a really good friend of mine, and I said, you know what? I am so angry right now. And she says, well, of course, Charlene, anger is a stage of grief. It's natural. And I said, no, I'm not angry he took his own life, because for me, I could understand why. I said, I'm angry he did it first. And of course, you say that, and that's exactly the look that people give me when I say that, because people are like, what? And I was like, I was angry he did it first, because you see everything that everyone goes through. You see the pieces that people have to pick up. How do you do that to people that you love when you know what's going to happen? And I so desperately wanted to die. And I was just torn between not wanting to hurt anyone, but not wanting to hurt myself anymore. But as my grandmother taught me, I put my head down and tried to just, keep pretending I was okay. I had another episode where I was sitting on my bathroom floor, teetering on the edge of, do I live? Do I die? I had gun cabinet key in one hand, pills in the other, and thinking about my son in the basement being the one that was probably going to find me. And so I reverted back to my high school days and picked up a knife and started cutting myself. And as I'm sitting there on my bathroom floor, watching the blood pool on the tiles around me, I was like, okay, Charlene, we got to do something. Like, we're going to either end it or we're going to get help. And the next morning I got up, I called the mental health services in my area and got in right away to see a psychiatrist. And I thought, great, here we go. This is finally, for the first time, I've asked for help. So this has got to make a difference. And I'm about 3 visits in with the psychiatrist, and my personality type is just tell me what I need to do. I don't want to talk about the past because I know why I am the way I am. I just need to know how to fix it. Just tell me how to fix it. And I remember looking at her and saying, can you just tell me how you dealt with your mental health struggles? And I remember watching her eyes kind of glaze over, and she goes, well, Charlene, I've never actually experienced mental health struggles myself. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, then how for the last 3 appointments have you sat there and told me that you understand how I feel? Because you can't. You cannot possibly understand what it feels like unless you have experienced it. So you're telling me how I should feel when you don't know. And I think at that moment, that was my last ditch. Okay, that's it. I give up. I can't even get help when I try to get help. So I walked out of that appointment, and I remember the last thing she was talking to me about was I'd actually received a life insurance policy from my ex-partner's death. And I had decided to purchase a house. And she was so excited about me getting a house, because people that are going to commit suicide don't buy a house. They don't make plans for the future. But what I was thinking about was buying that house was going to be the only legacy I was going to be able to leave for my children. I was going to at least be able to financially set them up. And so I left that appointment and I set a date, 30 days from then, that I was going to end my life. I was going to take that 30 days to get everything organized. I was going to ensure that no one had to plan or organize. Everything was going to be taken care of. I wanted to make it as painless as possible for the people I was leaving behind, which is you can't do anyway. But 2 weeks before the date I had set, a coworker and a friend of mine come up to me at work, and she said, hey, there's this women's workshop and it's in like 2 weeks. Do you want to come with me? And I'm thinking to myself, no, that's absolutely the last thing I want to do is go to this women's workshop. And she's like, please, I really want to go, but I don't want to go alone. And I was like, oh, there's my weakness right there. You know, like I've always cared about other people and helping other people more than myself. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll go. And I thought, this is okay. It's the Saturday and Sunday before the Monday that I have chosen to end my life. So I can just go there and pretend for 2 more days that I'm okay. And so I show up that Saturday morning to the workshop. I have my hunting rifle in the back seat of my car because I am going in 2 days to shoot myself. I'm going to the same location that my ex-partner went, and I'm doing it the exact same way. And I walked into that room at the workshop and I felt sick to my stomach, because I am looking at all these women who look like they have it all together. Like that's my perception at the time. They're, you know, well put together. They're all excited and talking. And, you know, I'm going to my seat and I can hear them talking about goals and how excited they are about everything that's going to be happening. And I'm feeling like, once again, I'm somewhere I don't belong. I just felt like this was a spotlight on me that I don't belong in this life, because here I am just being a fraud. I'm just trying to get through 2 more days before I end my life. So I sit down and I get through the first half of the Saturday, and it's health and wellness, it's financial stuff, diet and exercise. And for me, I'm like, yeah, I don't care about any of that stuff. And then the afternoon session comes on and a woman takes the stage and she's got no hair. She's got alopecia. And she talks about her struggles as a young child, as a teenager, and as a young woman, where she hated herself. She didn't love herself because she didn't fit the norm of what society told her she was supposed to look like. She didn't feel worthy of love because of how she looked, and how her life had completely changed the moment that she realized that if she could just love herself, that was enough. Everything else was a bonus as long as she loved herself. And I'm sitting in my seat and I hear a little voice that says, what about you? And I think to myself, yeah, what about you, Charlene? Like, what if you could have learned to love yourself instead of relying on everybody else to validate you and prove your worth and to say that you deserve to be here? What if? And of course, I brush it off because I've already made my mind up. And then the next speaker gets up and she starts talking about living with mental health struggles, depression, and suicidal ideology, and how she struggled for 20 years with this. And it was only when she learned to accept her mental health struggles as part of her, instead of fighting it and keeping that dark, trying to keep the dark at bay, she learned to embrace it, because when she pulled the dark in, it allowed the light to reach it as well. And I'm sitting there again, and I hear that little voice, what about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, like, what would my life have looked like had I learned to live with my mental illness? If I could have found a way to embrace it instead of fighting against it for all these years. And again, I brushed it off. And then the last speaker of the day got up, and it was a gentleman, and he spoke about dealing with alcoholism, broken marriage, losing custody of his kids, living with depression and suicidal ideologies, and how he had spent a year trying to find the perfect mix of pain medication and alcohol so that he could commit suicide, but make it look like an accidental overdose, because he sold life insurance and he knew the technicalities he had to be aware of. And one evening, his wife asked him to take the kids overnight, and he said yes, because it never happened. And it was on that night that he found that mix of drugs and alcohol. And while his kids were sleeping in the bed, in the next room, he's laying on the couch, slowly overdosing. And he hears a voice that says, no, not like this, not today. There's more. And he manages to get to his cell phone. He calls 911. He gets to the hospital and he gets help. He gets clean and sober. He gets into therapy, counseling, and his whole life has changed. And now he is going around and he's sharing his story in hopes that he can reach one person that needs to hear his story. Now I'm sitting in that chair at this point, and I am like, what is going on right now? Like, I'm almost looking for a hidden camera, but no one knew what was going on in my head, because I'm thinking, I'm at an event that I didn't even want to come to. And I have just heard 3 stories that have touched on the 3 areas of my life that I have struggled with. And it's like, this can't be by accident. Like, there's no way that this is just an accidental thing. And I'm like thinking, maybe it's because I finally got quiet enough, because I had made my decision so that I'd stop that internal chatter, that when I got quiet enough, I heard that message that I was supposed to hear. And it was in that moment that, like I say, it was a light switch moment where I sat in that seat and I said, no, I want to live. Like, I don't want to die. Like, if these people are out sharing their stories, helping people, maybe I can take everything I've gone through. Maybe that's the purpose of everything I went through in my life, was to create the story that could impact other people's lives. And so I went up to the event organizer after everybody was done talking for the day. And I said, I would love to sit down with you and talk to you about what this event has meant for me. And I shared my story and I said, I'd love to come back next year and talk. And she was like, I would love to have you. And so I went back the next year and I spoke on that stage, and looking out at those people sitting in that seat thinking, that was me, not knowing maybe there's someone in that audience that's just like I was at that point. And I remember before I got off the stage, I said, my purpose in sharing my story is if I can just give hope to one person, if I could just share my story and save one life, almost for the life that I felt like I hadn't been able to save, then everything I have experienced in my life has been worth it. And I walked off the stage and I was getting ready to leave the room, and a woman came up to me that had been in the audience, and she said, you know how you wanted to save a life? I just want you to know today you did. And she turned and walked away. And I was kind of sitting there like, what just happened, right? And then I heard that little voice that, I've come to know and love so well. And it just said, okay, now let's go find one more. So for me, every day is that search to find that one more person who just needs hope, that just needs to know, just to get through one more day, and just to know that they're not alone. And so that's why I'm honored to be here with you.
Wow. Wow. Like I, like I told you, it's before we even started, I'm just so grateful that you're still here.
Me too.
Because you didn't have to listen to that voice. You didn't have to reflect back on what hurt you the most, what you missed the most, to think about your children. There was a reason why every time you tried, you failed. And those that are listening, those that are watching, please share this story, because, like you say, you never know who you're going to impact. All of us are living a life that can change in a split second. Where we see others, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, not everyone is happy. Not everyone has this fantasy life that you just wish you could live. Not everyone is who they appear to be. Just because you may have money right now doesn't mean it could change tomorrow. Just because you have a loved one with you right now doesn't mean that loved one or you could wake up tomorrow. Embrace each other. Embrace what you have to offer. Just because we do not have what we would like to see others have, be grateful for what you do have. Vanessa, I'll let you go from here. I'll let you go from here.
I was going to say your story personally relates to me on multiple levels. And I still struggle with it. But it is one of those everyday fights. And whenever you do start sharing your story with friends, you start realizing that they're like, well, yeah, I've been through this too. And I'm still struggling with it also. And you realize that everyone else that you're connected with on some level is dealing with the same things that you are.
Yeah.
But when we don't talk about it, that's when everyone starts to feel alone and singled out, to where you're so much in your own head all the time with the anxiety and everything else and stress from everyday life just bearing down on you. You feel absolutely alone. And I feel like that's what depression does to you. It makes you feel absolutely alone, to where you're like, no one else cares enough for me to say something. And if I say something, they probably don't have time or they're too busy. So you just stay to yourself and keep it all to yourself.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it only makes it worse. And that one time that we do say something or be like, you know what? Okay, I understand what you've been through, and this is my story. Have you also been through this? Or are you personally struggling with this? Does it open up that door to be like, you know what? We're all struggling through the same thing at some form of fashion, but we're all still struggling. Yeah. And without the story, we lose the power of helping each other.
Absolutely. And I think, like, for myself, I knew logically, I knew other people had gone through sexual abuse as kids, and I knew other women suffered from domestic violence, and I knew other people struggled with mental health issues. I knew that in my head, but it was seeing three people take a stage and share so honestly
Mhm.
and so openly and authentically that it was like, it was that connection. And that's what, that's what we miss. Like you talk about feeling alone. That's what we're missing. We're missing the connection. And I know myself, like I had a, list of people that, on my bedside table that it was like, okay, well, if you're ever feeling really depressed, call this, here's a list of people that you can call. I didn't want to call. I didn't want to be a burden. And again, I didn't feel like anybody would really understand.
And a lot
that,
of that goes back to your grandmother, the way she was brought up.
absolutely.
And I want to speak on that because that is so true. Is that the mindset of I know what my mom is so much like your grandmother. It's that pride to where you don't share what you're going through. You hold it in, you fight through it. You never want to let anyone know what you're going through. Well, I will say for myself, whenever I was going through things from childhood, from marriage, from divorce, abuse, verbal, there comes a point where you're screaming on the inside for someone to listen. And no one listens. And you being able to express yourself, being able to let people know what you're going through is so very important. And whenever you've been through sexual abuse, the mental, verbal, abandonment, it gets to where it carries on with you through life to where anyone can trigger it if they don't listen to you. You get to where you want to have a voice. And people say, well, I'm going to use Vanessa and I as an example, where you're doing the podcast, you're talking to people. We're still everyday people. We're still human. And to be able to express how we're truly feeling, no one never knows because they see us as your life is perfect. And that's not the case. And that's just like with everyone. We want to be able to hear a voice. And that's so important for people in all of our cases, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's sexual, whatever it may be. You want to have a voice and know that it's safe. We're all looking for that safe space. And when that is not there, that's when the darkness continues to take over. And it is so easy to get drawn into that darkness to where you do want to take your life, where you feel like there's no one who cares. And I have to tell those that are listening and watching, everyone is important. It could be you. Just because you're happy now, I'm here to tell you folks, it could be you in just a matter of seconds. And I'm gonna bring this and then we'll draw back in. Vanessa and I, we were celebrating her 16th birthday. We were at the peak of happiness as happiness could be. No worries. And then only 3 days later to lose it all. To hear the thump of my husband at the time hitting the floor and having a massive heart attack, rushing down the stairs, not being able to save him, because no matter what we did, no matter what anyone was doing, we couldn't save it. To have that life sucked out of you with not having anyone to talk with you, to listen, and it puts you in like an outer body experience to where you need someone. It's like you're falling in a dark hole and there's no one there to catch you. We have to learn to enjoy, embrace every day because it's so precious. And Charlene, again, I can't say enough. Thank you for still being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vanessa, I'll let you take from there.
What was one of the things that you wish you could say to anyone, any woman or man that is currently struggling?
I do coaching now and working with women who have gone through some of the same stuff. And number one, self-love was the key for me. Knowing that you are enough, doesn't matter what you're going through. Because like you were saying, everybody's got that social media life where we don't know what everybody's going through, but just know that you're enough right now as you are. And love yourself, accept yourself. I work on a 3S, so self-love, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility. And just realize that whatever you have gone through in your life, you are in control right now and you can make different choices. And every day is an opportunity to make a choice to move yourself in the direction where it is. And you're not alone. I mean, I always, when I'm doing a podcast, I always make sure that I tell people, it's like, if you're going through something and you feel like you're all alone and that you don't have anybody to reach out to, message me on social media. I will come and sit in the dark with anybody. It's probably going to be virtually because everybody's all over the world, but I just don't want anyone to feel alone, because as you were saying, when you're in it, you feel so alone. And I know for myself, not feeling like I had anybody who understood and being afraid of someone judging me for what I was experiencing, and knowing that, you know what, I can be that safe space. Like I will hold space for anybody to just to be who you are and to go through what you're going through. So
So what resources have you found to be the biggest help for you through your journey, through this process that you've been going through?
I think getting really honest with myself, and I teach radical honesty. It was I could look at my life and I could place a lot of blame for where I was in my life. And but again, recognizing that the decisions, I have no control over what happened in my past, but I do have control over the decisions I make now. So accepting that responsibility and getting honest about it. But I think one of the biggest things for me, and it was such a healing process, was giving myself grace, like saying, I did the best I could with the tools that I had at the time in my life. And then, understanding that when I gave myself that grace, I could spread that grace out to other people in my life. And I've given that grace as a form for me to heal to everybody that was involved in my situation. Once my abuse came out, I actually found out that my mom had been sexually raped and abused by her dad. So I had a lot of anger at my mom for allowing us to go live there, knowing what he was. And so I had to give my mom grace and say, you know what, she did the best she could with the tools that she had at that time. Same with my grandmother, and even to my grandfather, because I don't know what his childhood was like. I don't know what he went through to become the man that he was, but I just had to give him grace and go, maybe he was doing the best he could with the tools that he had. That's a hard concept for a lot of people to embrace, but that forgiveness was for me, not for anybody else. So I think if you just can get really honest with yourself and then, lean into, you have the power to change that. And that's such an empowering thing.
True.
So, what is one of the things that keep you going every day, and even now, to not slip back?
just knowing that there's other people out there that are feeling like I was. I think I always, as a child, I wanted to be a journalist as a kid, and I loved story. And I think story was a way for me to maybe secretly share the things that were happening in my life. But even as a child, I understood the power of story and how impactful it is on people's lives. And I just, I go back to how I was feeling, and I really don't want anybody to feel that way. And if I can, share my story, and I can save one day, if I could save you from going through one day of heartache, like I said, that's what keeps me going every day when I get up and, and I jump on another podcast, or, I've got 2 or 3 booked for the day. And sometimes it's exhausting, like telling your story over and over again. But I always think, what if I don't do it and someone needed to hear my message?
So true.
So that's what keeps me going. So
true.
I want to thank you so much, Ms. Charlene, for joining us and sharing your story. And I hope that your story also helps someone else to find that safe place, and place where they don't feel judged, or at least reach out to you to have someone to talk to.
And thank you, ladies, for your platform, because the healing that you create by, hosting this podcast, like I always tell people, we don't realize how far our ripples travel, and for me, I just want to create the biggest ripples that I can create in this life. And the ripples that you are creating, you will probably never know how far they travel, but thank you for doing what you do.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. Your story, your life will impact many. Like I say, you're just one, but your life, your story will impact many.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for those of you who are watching and listening, please don't forget to check out our social media pages. And please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as we don't want you to miss out on our great guests or any of our great topics. And we want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you later.